Generation highlines, screen divisions, allocate time screens, laser lining rotations and code weavings, code track line provisions. Coming in, select lines, heights, area, interference, location, crop, circles, code weaving, location, attractions, directing modification your settings. We're allocating position of time centers and real-time locations. We're coming into 2015 line condition earth transition screens. Your calculations here in time zones, time sectors times pi, correlates city and track lines and all lines that travel. Directing modification of your cycle lines and highest interference is the cycle's location of your psychological reset position of programs. It puts position of travels. It allocates your position of time frames. Your position lines of your dimension lines of scales allocates line communications. Now, we all start with line condition of E equals mc squared. What does that mean in line set location? E equals mc squared. Energy line coordinating lines. E equals, what is the equal line rotations? What's above, what's below? There's no separation of calculation line settings. Trial position of mass, equation lines of from and to and from. Direct lines are direct and all lines are high interference. Getting direct lines to your binary, voicing grid line communication. See the sound barriers, line rotations, you can actually see 1,000 position of travel lines. Measured scales, calculations, shipping, containers, line screen interference. Sending lines of high calculations all levels on the docket, line rotation cycles. Generate the spring location and habitation zones. Calculating modifies all levels of U and track location system. Directing lines of modifications 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You guys got to get a modification of your binaries now, okay? Especially with the team line. The computer operates line screen is changing the track location system. Your allocated position of time frames, your location of frequency is going to be 150,000. Correlating track location 144,000 line condition stargates, open through channel. This allocates your position of time frames and line interference that puts line communication setting. You guys are already out at 25 o'clock locations. Spacing line comes in direct signals. Now, their panel correlates and sending is at 12,000 lines of measure. Scales of balanced lines of pi generates screen location high calculation settings. The calculation of the team line will be in a track line provision. Correlation set lines high calculation setting. 24 lines of high interference, which is hemisphere location of pi. Speed season will be in a 12-line rotation cycles and generations of pi. They understand how to use their hemispheres as location avatar settings. Time frequency lines of dimension lines of scales, guys, coming all lines of pixelation graph calculations. Snowy graph interference. Now, position lines, highest interference. Think of the highest formation location of screen line, your vibrational graph lines. Your body adapters, line condition of course lines, and highest interference is going to go through gravitational line screens. It allocates your position location of your systems. So in point graph calculated line interference, you're going to feel like 4 feet above line rotations and ceiling communications. Okay, your avatar is going to central calculations now. The trends, dimensional lines of space. Quantum thoughts changes all communication setting to phenomenon. Sets lines of communication line screens. So we go correlates lines of vector skies into locations in your fractals. Fractals and fields and self-location modification lines and line condition setting. Coming in line and rotation lines and constellation screens. Direct modification screen location settings adaptation. Divergence lines and legions. Sets lines of course, track line provisions. If we get an allocated time center, 13 lines of track lines, 3 line provision. Now it correlates the lines of high interference. The calculus of the team is now computer frame lines and recept locations. They have to learn how to use the time frames in seconds, minutes, and hours minutes, and seconds. Direct and redirect. Okay, so the process is going to get a lot more trickier now when you go to higher communication and geometric operation design. Core channels communications. We've got 3 line provisions, 1 line cycle, 8 line condition. Now, a line condition goes to 21 line settings. You can change the back frame communication time frame. So instead of 326, you can go through 723. 7 million channels, 2, 3 line centers, 8 line tractions. Now you can use your time frame in any way and form, right? Because it doesn't have a provision line. There's no limited resource location of clocking. This is taking the team lines out of allocate position time frame location of time lists, shapeless and formless. Your structured lines are now in configuration line screens. It directs signal location your settings. So species lines and all communication settings is going to be in holographic set location and pixelation graph calculations. We're all going to be in the 2D worlds. Okay? Everything modulation screens, adaptation lines of surface, puts lines of panels, calculation line, right? Center units in position of probing, directing lines of modification screens. It calculates modifies location of travel settings and mechanisms over power. The generation lights is a high line channel. The correlation setting to its holographic line screen sets lines of provision. Its center core is through track location of line connections of tracking device line screens. Gets your line communication into all centers. Calculation modification is all detection, lines and your inhibitors in line rotation surface. Now directions and modification screen lines and location or mapping sequence. Pi generates the line screen. Okay, so let's go in rotation surface. Everybody understands the part of accelerated line in the chamber. Hydroglider line calculation setting, kaleidoscope communications into hydrogliders. So we get in a platitude lines of a container line rotations of core setting the track lines of an engine. So we got correlates and setting track lines of Earth. Calculate modified powers and the apps are line screens. So we got 3 communication lines of CERNs and track provision center calculations. 3 lines. Correlation with the lines of 3 donuts and the center correlates and setting constellation of 3 tractions. Direct modification 1 signal, 1 correlates in track lines. High center interference, inline settings, and travel position of triangulation. All right. Center core lines its units in lines of flywheel and line rotation. Okay, track position line centers. 3 generation screens and a 4-track provision. Center core lines of magnetic highway information travel and position of travel. Okay, correlates the calculation in line condition setting and sublocations. All right, generation screens and high setting. All right, so platforms of 1 crosses line stream and a 4-line measure. Correlate calculations in a 4-track line provision lines and a cross line screen location setting in the opposite system. Child position levels going forward and track line position location of 4 lines calculation. Okay, so it's amazing how the cerebral comes in cortex line design, center lines its units, line position of its power, generates the screen location setting, and all levels of orbiting communication of channels of operation. Done by equation. All right. Center units in an aligned center's high calculation setting is wiping signals and travel and communication system. If you look really close, you can see the energetic lines of a robot long rotation surface and track communications. See the robot in center? See the disk line screens and direct signal locations of platitude line rotations and code moving travels. You guys have test lines and Friday line center line conditions with settings, sublocations. Measures on accountability, center core lines attractions in a 3-line cycles. 3 CERNs in line condition setting and product accelerators 300,000 light years away in traction. Done through line communications. All right. All right. Center core tractions. We set up provision lines of cycles. Now we set up lines of all levels of probing. Track location lines of setting. Bar graph lines and 4 graph screens. Sets lines of communication of 4 settings and travel. 4 correlated lines of Pluto. Line conditions of Jupiter. Line conditions of Mercury. Line conditions of high center interference of Neptune and 4 set locations. Direct modification center lines, correlation lines of high center interference and 0 attractions. Platitude lines into 4-track line provisions, 45-degree angles, and a 3 set location. All right, so it gets tricky now because the Stargate line screen is opening up panels in center communication its operation cycle. Sets correlation lines of high center interference in the line rotation cycle, line position location of tetrahedron, octahedron, calculating modification line screen interference of travel position of 3-point centers. Calculate modify archetypes comes in line screen in a line condition setting, pi generation screen location system. Travel position of point lines attractions, direct lines of solar sails, and line communication. All right. Solar sail in 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location. All right. That's how it's set up. Okay. After tomorrow, you guys are going to be 150,000 line setting. Waving cycles generates line conditions of nautical line rotation interference, aft line communication of stern. Position of travel lines. Jib. Center correlation lines of travels. Weather correlation setting a high line rotation system into line centers. Company communication lines of center line communication and geostorms and applications. Center communication line position operation certification system. Okay, that my question. That's what's going to happen in line settings. Now we allocate position of E equals line center location M. M is mass, calculation modified, line center location 2, line conditions of from. Sets correlation lines and high center interference. 2 from lines to 2045, trapplication lines equals lines of Earth. Earth line rotates the calculation lines of E lines equals lines of mass. E line rotation, center line communication lines of 2 tractions, 2 divisions, 2 line rotations, and 2 calculations of ground lines and crop circles is at design, is at position. The correlation line to track line has a line condition of lulls. It tethers its lines of metric meters of scales and line rotation cycles, generates screen location of 4 travels into Pluto in line rotation cycles and generation screens of high calculation. Okay. Center measures, correlations of scales, balanced lines of high center interference. So line rotation cycles generate lines infinity eights. Center correlation lines of cross line screens of two atom line rotations and triangulation line condition setting the molecule. Direct calculation in line rotations to calculation of graph calculation screens. Flywheel correlations and interact lines, position of balanced lines center high interference, metric meters and scale lines, atom line rotation surface into calculation of line, calculation setting, nucleus core line, and position of phase recognition. Okay. All going to be done in set locations. Travel lines, screen lines, high center interference. Okay. Face recognition setting and travel calculations. Okay. Boom. All right. Okay, so tone divisions, we allocate line screens, sets lines, communications. So the E line comes out of line rotations, mass, calculations, square unit rotations. So we take the square, circle lines at equal line rotation centers, change communication of panels, equal lines at E, sets correlation setting at 2045, track position line centers, line signal line conditions at 2050, set locations at two gate line centers, and panels of location and center calculations, and a 45-degree angle in set location. Done my equation. Remember I told you guys about understand your higher self, screen line, adaptation line cycles, higher self equals lines calculation system, track position on the CPU, track calculation line centers, high interference. 24 million line rotations, track location at 24 clockings, like I said, 24 grounds, and 24 atmospheres of traction. Direct modification lines equals lines of high interference of 111, and position on equals lines of 112, position locations of 113, track location of CPU of 114. The correlation line track lines is 144,000. Calculation 1,000 line screen, direct lines of seconds over minutes over pi, track locations into stargates, and center calculation of 555 channels of communication. That my question. So the center line centers is really understand how to use the OPT system, child calculation line interference and line communication and compute settings. C lines correlate the calculations into compute, line rotations into communications, 3 line cycles. Generate the screen lines of pi, splits the lines anomaly, track location provisions. E line centers, high interference, separates E line calculations of mass. Mass correlates the calculation setting, calculate high interference into square root and communication of setting. Okay. Triangulate line center splits the anomalies into 4-track division. Okay, center coordinate settings, metric meters and line setting, and satellites and modem and line rotation cycles and generation. Direct the high center line condition setting sets up all communication of tether, 3-track line provision lines of pi generation, screen lines, calculation of satellite, and set design. Triangulate position programs, flywheel line rotation, 8-line rotation circles, and set locations. Travel calculus lines, ground lines, high center interference. Mother Earth sets communications, waiting on signal, 2050, a set design. It's all set up. Boom. Okay? It's amazing how we come in line provision cycles and generation screen lines and habitation zones, in track location provision lines, walking signal and line calculation setting, and a 300,000 line rotations, product accelerator, and chamber set location setting and track calculations. Okay? Face recognition. Okay? All right, power generators of pi, signal lines of high center interference, metric meters, line position, travel calculation, point centers of travels. Geostars, box frame lines, metric meters, lines of scales, 4 provisions of 8, and line calculation setting of graphs. Okay, track provisions lines, team that comes in a box line rotation surface and track locations. Data ops, Heather, you'll be in data servers under 3-track provision. Chris, center correlations of fly, wheel, track lines of provision line cycles, generate the lines of 24 lines of east lines, north line, south line communication setting to travel position point centers. JIPS, your line calculation setting, your Stargate portal line rotation of 44 line setting the high interference to travel position point centers. Towers of communication, lines of Asgard, line setting that travels to towers of communication setting and travel. Done by equation, guys. All right. So everything's set up through sectors, vectors, and quads. The correlation lines of track lines and deviation settings and travel. Point lines of graph, puts lines of communication line centers to altitude. Sets lines of AT line centers equals lines of location, location line conditions of communication, communication lines of high center interference, compute line rotation, equal line rotation surface. Trink lines of 3 equals lines of 3 line rotation and center correlations of an atom. Direct lines of atom equals lines of correlations and track lines into astral projections and travel. Modification lines, pi generation screens. Allocate lines of atoms, split the anomalies and track location. Proven lines of cycles, energized line calculation setting into tractor beams, direct modification lines, colossal communication lines, high interference, hydroglider line rotation cycle generation, direct lines and levels, program setting, line connection setting, neutralized communication setting, and energy line screens, direct modifications, 4-line signals, modification lines of crop circles, metric meters and scales, and balance calculation. So it's amazing how this is all set up in line tracks, high center interference, flux capacitor, line screen, high interference, and trap positional point centers of traction. Done by equation. And if you look really close, you can actually see the intelligence of formation. Hoo-ah! Center correlation traction. Okay? All right. So the central line position location of your satellites, your modems, and your Wi-Fi rotation cycles, your flywheels, are going to track division lines of cycles. Correlation lines of track, 1 line measure. Sets of triangulation line split. That's 3 lines of measure. Position of metric meters, scales, lines of atom. Electron sets a core line track. Platforms and communication of 4-line cycles. Generate the screen lines and high center interference in all communication setting and program in this application. Okay. It disappeared. It's going too fast. So the travel position line centers comes in opposite system in its application of travel calculation point lines attractions. Setting lines of pi in a 4 travel position. Okay. Coordinate lines of pi, split in lines of high interference, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in its application. All right. Generate the screens, center core lines attractions, flywheel line rotations, centering calculations. 3 cerns are set up in position travel. Now my equation. All right, so the center core that's setting the track lines in the nucleus core is a box line rotation circulation program. 2 lines of deviation line screens. Center core lines, track lines, high interference. Pluto comes in line rotations. Center core lines, XD1000 comes out in traction. Lands and signals, modification waiting on signal. Lands and signals, modification waiting on signal. And allocations. See the correlation of track lines, position, provision? If you look really close, you can see the phase direction of time sequence. There's the phase. Track position lines, center core lines, high center interference, metric meters, scales, communication lines, setting high position. Travel lines of platforms, 3 lines of 4 track positions. Calculation line interference in a 3-line provision cycles and a 3-generation screen. Direct modification line centers a mechanism line travels in a line condition of center of communication. Direct modification line cycles into Pluto expands line screen. Pluto is now an expansion in location. Done by equation, guys. All right, so the central unit line screen lines, so you have a 24 inhibitor line rotations, 24 lines of species, equals correlation line calculation setting into 0.1 attractions, 24 line screen high interference into 144, track provision location of 0 calculations, right? So that's calculation lines of species, application of team setting and travel. 2 graph lines, 4 travel line rotations surface and travel. Point lines of graphs, 2 lines of traction, 4 line divisions, center correlated line high interference, species line and high interference line settings, waving cycles, generate lines of 0, point lines of 1, and track location and provision. Core lines of high interference, dimensional sales and track locations. Hoo-ah! All right, so we got a 24-line measure, 2 lines of track, 4 line provisions, equal lines, correlations, track lines, 144,000 lines, added 5-line sequence into 150,000 screens. 0 operation waiting on signals and line condition of hangers and line calculating setting into 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 into solar sail at track locations. Hoo-ah! Now we've got the ground line, circle line rotation surface, allocates position of time center, center correlations and attractions. 4 lines of 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of high center interference, 1 graphical screen line interference. We got communication lines, high interference. We got April calls and box line rotation cycles. Generate the screen lines, high center interference. Coming to track position line cycles, generate communication setting, time zones, line rotation surface, track position lines of center, and correlation and settings of traction. Hoo-ah! No more time zones. All right, so line position is graph calculation lines of data that process lines of mapping sequence. It allocates position of programs. So we go on line calculation. Let's go through tether coordinates and lines of 18 lines. Wait till it gets to 0. Sets locations of 19 line centers. Okay. Boom. 19. See that? Solar location, time zone line sequence, core line tracks. Here's the sun. Here's the moon. Sun and the moon. Correlated line interference and flywheel correlation lines of yin and yang of process communications. Done by equation. Center correlation lines, figure 8. We're done. All right. Time zone sequence, platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 in set location. 45-degree angle. Line condition height centers 1% over pi. Equals lines of calculation 99.99% line spiritual. 100% line communication setting. Charge mix of timelines. Sequence line position of the pi. Generates location system. Triangulate and high interference. Signature position of streamlines. Line condition high interference. Cell modification screen lines. Adaptation lines of dimensional wall lines. Center correlation to track position location line conditions. Allocate time screens, high position, operates line set location system, ground setting, center operation, magnetic highway information line channels, and communication setting of travel. Done by equation. See the intelligence? Woo! Okay. It's all set up for vision and all calculation. Okay. Going beyond, people, going beyond. But it's amazing how we come and track the vision location of your dimensional cells and your solar cells. All through 3-line rotation cycle. Generation line screens of high center interference and modems and Wi-Fi's and satellites and track location provisions. Understand your central line connection, your binaries. Transistors, resistors of pi. Whoa. Center correlation lines of track line position lines of cycles. Generate calculation line. XC1000 comes in position. XC1000 comes in position. XC1000 comes in position. XC1000 comes out of position location. Okay. 4 generation lines, platforms communication line 0. Center core setting and track position 1 center. Sets calculation line interference. Now the platform comes in 1 signal, 1 activation, time center, timeline, loop, and line rotation edit. Edit formations of ground lines, data streaming and line rotation cycles, generation screen location, high setting. Positions of patterns, center core setting line interference, set position. Tether correlation 1 signal, line setting, line condition, XT1000 line rotation, cycle line communication. Done by equation. Metric meters of scales, balance lines and mapping sequence. Take all time zone line interference. 1 line center line interference, 196 equals line communication box, lines triangulation line communications. Coordinates, communication lines equals lines of Pluto line rotation cycle line. High interference is Saturn, satellite communication modification screen, direct line modification CPU, direct calculation lines, coordinates line communication of Saturn, track location of Mercury, line condition of levels of Pluto, size calculation of Jupiter, line condition of centers. Uranus line rotations, track location provision, center calculation line setting, the sun line rotation surface, track facing the moon, track position line center interference, and track location. Down by equation. Okay, metric meters of scales and balancing line setting allocates position of time frame. So we get an 18 line screen, set line communication of 4 travels, 1 indicate lines of underscore, 8 equals lines of platform crossing line calculations. You guys have to understand how to direct and redirect and change frames. You can do that in locations. You can center up and you can continue on, or you can pause and signal line condition setting. Travel position point lines of 1 atom, 2 atom, 3 lines, and 4 track locations. Provision lines and the high calculation lines of data formation screen location, high setting. Travel position 18 lines of 4 and travel positions calculation. So it's all always a modification of interpretation screens. How you create it through line set location is holographic setting, a set design. Done by equation. All right, so center meters. Let's go through XT1001 screen. Now, at XT1001 screen is allocating line screens in your habitation zone lines. It allocates your position timeframes. So we're going to take 22 line settings. We're going to separate the line position of 0, 0 correlation. It's going to come in a 23 line setting. 23 line rotation, 0, 0 calculation. All right, so we take the 23 track. We take the 17 lines set location, and we take the 4 generation screens. Center correlation lines of traction and division of center correlation line conditions with energetic dome screen. Now, direct lines of high interference, we take the 2 lines, we take the 3 lines, we take the 0, 0, 0, 0, and 4 track location provisions, all calculated modify in center correlation setting of traction. Done by equation. All right, so the correlation lines of the mapping line centers of time frame, 7 line units. Graph calculation, graph screens. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 line communications. 45 line centers, 47 provisions, and 40 line connection. Travel lines at all lines, energetic lone screens, high center interference, and towers of communication cycle lines. Direct calculation lines and high interference of pi, generation of solar screen lines, high center interference of solar sail and traction. Direct modification line settings, all line circus and line rotation surface, and line setting locations of 2 tethers, 1 line rotation surface, and flywheel cords setting track lines and center correlation. Done by equation. All right. So I'm just setting up center and correlations of hologram line screens. But it's amazing how you come up with vision lines of phase direction time sequence. Each one has a phase direction of time center, okay, in set locations. Box position lines of triangulation, read lines of high center interference, and crystalline calculation all levels. Anti-carrying, calculation of A track lines of A track lines of B. Center correlation lines of C equals lines of E, line of rotations. Fibonacci line, squirrel. Calculation lines, center high interference, and set position operation. Center core lines of track lines of division, and center calculation lines of waving cycles and generation. Done my equation. All right, so the solar sails are set up line position locations. Now we got waiting line rotations in 7 bodies of water. Audio communication screen, high center interference. Setting coordinate lines, wide line centers, H line rotation cycles, generate location setting 114. Track location lines and 1 lines for 4 line rotations position 2050 in track locations. It's all set up. 7 line screens, high center interference, habitation zones, and track location line conditions. Now, the provision lines, the calculation setting, the clock line rotations has a 4-graph calculation line screen, 4 box line rotations, and a 3 triangulation split. Okay, so allocates line screens and data process communication in a 2-line setting. Measures equals lines of scale, scales lines of communication, line center interference. Metric meters, 1 line rotations equals line calculation line setting. Sets lines of species, set lines of team. Okay. So line communication systematic line and metric meter line condition memory, line communication is mine, line condition setting, teleportation screen appears, 0 coordinate setting track lines, provision cycles, line center high interference in 2000, weighted on line rotation of 15 track location. Track modification lines of triangulation line condition setting, earth line rotation surface and triangulation, until levels of intelligent formation. The intelligence of the earth. Done my equation. All right, so waiting on signals is understanding how the plasma screen line adaptation surface. It correlates calculation lines, electrical lines, lacing lines, and program set location. 3 centers, right? Point lines attractions. Now this word comes into fractals. Fractals in the 3 set location of 6. 6 lines of 8 in line rotations. 8 lines of 8, 8 lines of 6, 8 lines of 7, 8 lines of 12, 8 lines of 24 in track location. Division lines of high center interference, we take the is0 lines and 2 track location, and provision lines of 0.1 in line condition setting. Spacing line, team line, and track location. Direct modification lines of center coordination lines, the next 1000 comes in, scans lines to center line rotations, sets communication line screens, and line communication setting, and optical system locations of travel. Center coordination lines, energetic line screen, 1, 2, 3, and set position of calculation. Done by equation. All right. Central units, graph calculation line screens. Let's go through the inhibitors, lines of channels. Positions of process, remote screen lines, adaptation of surface, allocates position of time frames. Okay, so we go through box line change, triangulation line screen, E equals MC squared. E equals MC squared. Okay, so there's no more central line center location of separation. Center coordinate lines of energetic dome screen location to its location grid and set position. Sets on all communication line settings, you guessed it, all lines of high center interference of face recognition. All right. No more E equals MC squared. It's gone. All right, so the central line centers, the allocate position of time frame is now changed to the barometer line screen that correlates and set in the mapping sequence. We put positions of pi 1, 1 in line centers of 3, sets location of 1, 1, lines location of 4, sets lines of 4, sets lines of 3, sets lines of 7, 7 line communication setting, 3 waving patterns, rotation surface, and triangulation resets. Direct lines modification into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 locations. Waving line cycles generate the screen lines of high center interference, adaptation of line conditions. Crossing line screens into colossal calculation setting and track locations. Direct modifications, center correlation lines of Earth, center communication line settings, and all line rotation surface and track location. Down by equation, guys. So the platitude line screen is now at 0 correlation setting, track position lines of 0, 0, and 0 correlation. Done. That's it. Merge and correlation lines after tomorrow. 0, 0, 0 is in track location. Box line, circle line rotation surface, in line position of perimeters and line setting high interference in full communication setting and all track location of face recognition. All right, I know you guys are having fun, right? So it's known how to set these things up in holograms, screen lines, high standard interference, adaptation, cycle lines, high communication setting, provocation setting, and probing. Correct calculus modification, screen lines, high interference, and location your holograms. Now we go into the binary relines. This is a reset position. I know you guys are like, whoa, this is going a lot. Teleportation, energy lines, systematic line, energy lines, or relays. Okay? You got to understand how to reframe your position of travel lines and your point lines of track location and provision. Center core lines, tunnel lines, defense lines, funnel, communication surface, and travel positions to its operation are ground lines of your Earth, and center core is in the 3-track provision cycles and generation. Okay? Now, Earth correlates and track lines. That's catapult line rotations in 4 settings. Okay? Puts position lines as cerebral cortex line design, mind line signals, memory line correlation setting into all correlation line conditions to assist in position. Okay? So you got the memory line, okay, and line interference, setting and calculation highest interference. You got the mind line correlation setting, okay, into all calculations. Okay? You come into modification of triangulation line condition. Okay? Splits anomalous in a pi in generation screen. All right. Point lines of tracks allocates position of time centers, guys. This is where all time frames, lines, the highest interference of time zones disappear in track locations. Done by equation. It's all set up. All your provision lines, your time zones will go back to 0. Center units of graph calculated lines is 7 days a week. Take that out of track line provision cycles. Direct lines of patterns, data line rotation cycle lines. Now the application line connects interference. The psychosis location your psychological reset position program. Let's add lines of 19 equals lines of 4, 4 lines of 3, track location lines of 7, track lines of high interference, equal line coordinates and track lines, in provision of cycle lines of highest interference. Direct modifications 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Point, graph, and set location. Track division lines, X3000 comes in traction. Center core lines, high cross is line set location of point graphs. Triangulate line interference, sets communications, vortex into the center core line setting in position. Your track calculations. So if you look really close, you can see the line calculation setting, right? What is it? Snake. So what are we doing? Center core lines and track lines. Say goodbye to all communication of snake line screen. Done through equation. Metric meters, scale lines of balance, high interference, set communication line settings and travel position of point lines attractions, snowy graph interference, take it out, track line high interference into holographic communications, screen lines, adaptation lines, ice age, track location lines, pixelation graph calculations, anti-carrion, anti-mental, anti-frame, anti-travels, and pixelation graph communications, point graph communications, and high direct location of mapping sequence, and coordinates locations of pi generation. Done by equation. Okay, it's all done. Okay, if you look really close, you can actually see the intelligence coming in formation screen. You can actually see the pixelation graph. You can actually see the mapping sequence. You can actually see the coordinate location setting the travel. You actually can see the metric meters of scales. You can actually see the balance position of travel. All 3 set locations. Okay, so you got a new point graph line calculation, screen location, adaptation surface. Measure lines of point lines of graphs. Now we set line communication of securities, fluid communication lines of 1 cycle. Let's change the coloration line screen. Setting position calculations in all levels of setting. Center lines into 2, 2, 2 track locations. Center lines of 1, center lines of 2, center lines of 3, and center lines of 4. Pluto. Graph calculation of data line rotation surface. North wing, woo! South wing, woo! East wing, woo! And all levels and set location of west wing. And set location setting calculation to a system. All done by equation. New mapping sequence line correlations time zones. Direct lines of 0, correlation lines calculation setting. 0 correlations from north, east, west, and south. 4 parameters lines of 0, 0, 0, 0, point lines of setting, equals lines of 0, 1. Graph lines calculations, force line correlation pi generates screen lines into 0, 0 track locations. 1 provision lines of 1, 1, 1, 4 track locations, 1, 1, 1 line setting, 1, 1, 1, 2 line setting, 1, 1, 3 line setting, 1, 1, 4. Geostorms, line connection of position over power, generate the screen lines calculation setting, and measure and correlation. Done by equation. Woo! That's the move mapping sequence line connecting center interference. You guys are coming to line position your avatar. This records the settings of 4 lines send a line condition to 5. Generate communication lines of your elements. The space line communication setting when you coordinates and track lines. And you know what? Inline rotation of the surface and trapplication provisions in center correlation lines of 2050 calculations. We're done. We are done. Woo! All right. So, how do you like them apples? We are done. We did it. It's all on waiting signal now. Everything is going to be pi. Why? What's the computer at line rotations? 15 lines of 5, 16 lines of 5. In order, correlation setting, clock line communication setting, balance position travel lines, seconds, minutes, and hours, hours, minutes, and seconds, direct and redirect line position, and 2050 set location. Woo! We're done. How was that? You guys have fun? It's amazing what we just finished doing, right? Solar graph interference, high decision travels, point lines of graphs, high calculation line connections, living in cycle line communication setting, and all travel positions operation. Okay? See you in 5.